So hey there fellow YouTubers, it's Frank Bush here again. So in today's video I'm going to do a do-it-yourself project, which is the Frank Bush Modular Ropecraft system. Now I use this system to really replace, when I'm out in the field, to replace any type of knots I need to tie or any of that business. This is probably the most flexible system that exists on the planet when it comes to what you can do without really tying any knots when you're out in the field. So I'll shift camera angles here, I'll walk through the different components that I'm going to use for this build out, and we'll start to get into it. So if you're interested in that type of content, stay tuned. Alright, so like I say, I'll walk through the different components just so you can know what I'm working with, yeah? So what I have here is a couple packages here of heat shrink tubing. So this is single wall heat shrink tubing for the size of the rope that I'm using. I'm using 10 to 8 AUG heat shrink tubing, and this is common. You'll find this at like hardware stores and stuff. It's really to protect electrical wires. Normally that's the main purpose of it, where you kind of slide it over the wire and then you heat it with a lighter and it melts it and contracts it and covers the wire so you don't have any exposed wires and that kind of thing. And what I have here is, originally this was a 300-foot roll. I've used a bit of it already, but this is Kevlar rope. This is 3.5 millimeter and it's 1,800 pound strength. So to give you an idea of the kind of cordage that I'm going to be working with today, and this is a braided rope that has a hollow core to it, yeah? So I've got a lighter here just to do some melting as we go. I've got a little piece of metal here. Now you could use a fid, and fids are used in Ropecraft work to do splicing and that kind of stuff, but I just have a piece of metal that I've bent into this shape where it allows me to do the purpose that a fid would serve without having to go out and buy a fid, if you will. I've just got a measuring tape to take some measurements, a cutting board, and a knife so I can cut through this Kevlar rope. So I'll just shift camera angles again here and we'll get on with the build, yeah? Okay, so this modular system comes in two kind of key modular components. One of them is going to be a 12-foot length of this Kevlar rope. Like I say, I'll give you a close-up of that so you can see. And it tends to fray on the ends a little bit just naturally on its own accord, yeah? So that's one of the reasons why I'm using the heat shrink tubing. So all I'm really going to do here is turn around and take this tubing. I'm going to cut off a chunk of it, roughly about a third that I'm going to take. And I'll take about a third again because I'll need 2 of them. So really simple, nothing to it. Just kind of set those bits to the side. Now I'm going to take my Kevlar cordage now, and I'm just going to kind of make sure that the ends are all nice and together, stuff them into this heat shrink tubing, and I just want to push that in all the way to the point where it pops out the other side, so nothing complex here. And I'll just grab my little fid replacement tool, I say my trusty little piece of metal there, and I'm just going to kind of push that through a bit until I feel that the cordage has successfully stuck out the other side. And you can hopefully see that there's, like I say, not much to this, of just get that cordage to kind of come through now. And I'm on now with the first piece. So now all I'm going to do is just back that up now. I'll grab my lighter. I'm going to just back this up now, right up to the end of that cordage. Now it's okay that there's a little bit hanging out. I'm not overly worried about that, it'll just burn away. But now Kevlar rope is really heat resistant. I kind of mentioned this early on now. Kevlar rope can handle temperatures up to a couple hundred degrees Fahrenheit. And that's one of the reasons why I decided to go with Kevlar. You could use a Dyneema cordage to do what I'm doing in this project. And you can do a variance of this, and you could use bank line or paracord or other things as well. Now, if you were using jungle knots rather than the way I'm going to do things, but as I go through the video, I'll kind of talk about all this stuff in detail. The reason why I decided to go with the Kevlar cord is because it's really, really heat resistant, and I plan on using this in close proximity to fires and that kind of stuff. Kevlar rope isn't as UV resistant as say Dyneema would be, but Dyneema's temperature tolerance is way less. So I feel much safer using Kevlar rope when I'm out in the field and when I'm around fires and that kind of stuff without it melting and trashing the rope. You know, Kevlar can handle being very, very, very close to heat source for extended periods of time without it causing any damage. And whereas Dyneema, if you get it even near a flame, you've got problems. And one of the modular things I do with this system is set up a cook kit system where I'm having this cordage close to fire. So Dyneema really isn't the most ideal choice for doing this kind of construct. Kevlar really is. And like I say, Kevlar doesn't have the UV resistance that Dyneema does, but quite often when you're out doing bushcraft and stuff, you're deep in forest where you're not necessarily going to have, you know, direct sunlight shining into your location. So having this cordage being exposed to direct UV, you know, intense direct UV light isn't as big of a problem as most would think it to be. Whereas, like I say, the Dyneema can, withstand the UV better, but the fact that it can't handle the heat to me is a critical reason why I decided to go with this Kevlar cordage instead. So I'm just letting this cool now because, like I say, I just kind of lit it with a lighter and just kind of roll it out so it all the glue and stuff that is on this stuff is kind of smooth, because it'll make it easier when we go to move through the next steps. So I know you might get a little soot on your fingers, you know, such as life, right? But needless to say, that's the one end done, and that's really just to protect this Kevlar cordage from fraying out later on in time. And one of the good parts about using this heat shrink tubing is it can withstand temperatures up to around 500 degrees Fahrenheit as well. So it can, it can withstand temperatures that are almost right next to a fire, if you will, without it compromising that material as well. And if it does receive heat, all it's going to want to do is shrink more onto it, you know, for it to actually melt and that kind of stuff, and totally vaporize. The chances of that are pretty low when it comes to the uses of how we're going to use this when we're out in the field. So I'm going to need this cordage. I'm going to turn around. It's really easy now for the second little piece of shrink tubing that I cut off. I'm just going to slide that over the first so I can get it onto the line. And now the thinking really is I'm going to run out a 12-foot length of this Kevlar cord, and I'm going to cut it to that length. So I'll go measure off the 12 feet. I'll cut it, and then we'll seal off the other end of the cordage just as we did on this end, and then we have our base piece of cordage that we can start working with to move forward. Yeah. Okay, so like I say, I went and measured off to the 12-foot mark, and I'm simply just going to take my knife and cut through that cordage. It's really just that simple. I'm going to take that little heat shrink tubing that we had slid on over top of the previous one, slide that out to this end of the cordage, and then I'm just going to do the same kind of thing we did on the other end, where I'm just going to get it right out to the tip. I'm going to turn around and take my lighter and just let the heat shrink tubing do what the heat shrink tubing does, and kind of cinch down around that cordage. You know, and if you're sensitive to this kind of stuff, you might want to do this in a well-ventilated places. I'm more of a savage that way and just kind of do whatever, but you know, if you're more conscious about being healthy and safe and all that kind of happiness, then take whatever precautions you feel you need to. But I've never had any big issue with this kind of stuff, so I don't worry about it too much. And really, I just want to make sure I heat up that shrink wrap tubing so that it really binds on to that cordage well. So, like I say, that'll be piping hot at this point in time. I give it about 45 seconds to a minute or so just to kind of cool down a little bit. And then you can see where it'll form some glue bubbles and that kind of thing, where it's pushed like the glue out at the end of the tube. And before it cools down entirely, I want to just kind of roll that flat in my hands. And you definitely don't want to do this too soon because the glue will stick to your fingers. But after a minute or so, you kind of just roll it in your fingers, and it allows it to lay flatter against the cord. And that way, when it comes to later on, as we go to move through the process of making out this modular system, it's just easier. And this becomes the better part of my FID later on that I then use to do the splicing work. that if you're not savvy with what a fid is, when you're wanting to splice rope, you kind of loosen your rope up a bit, and a little pointy device you stick through just to get through the cordage, and then it's got like a hollow tube on the other end that you can put cordage in, and it makes it easier to splice through. Hopefully I articulated that well, but it's just a really minor little component that you can have, and I find that for most of the stuff I do, I can just use, like I say, a little piece of metal to serve its purpose without having to spend $20 on a fid. Yeah, it's, you know, form fits function in that regard. So needless to say, this is cool now, and we'll start to, or will be in a minute, but we'll measure this out now. I'm going to take the other end of this 12-foot length of cordage where I've got the other one. I'm just going to kind of hold those right together with each other, and I'm going to walk it out now in my hand and just find where that halfway point is on this. So that's where the halfway point will be, yeah? I'll shift camera angles and we'll start to move on to the next step. Okay, and like I say, so I've got the little halfway point now, right here in my cordage. Now I've got my measuring tape out. From this halfway point, I'm just gonna pinch and hold that right there. From this halfway point, I wanna measure back 7 inches, and then I wanna kinda pinch and hold at that point. And I'm just gonna separate my 2 lines here. So it's just easier for me to do this as we move forward. So right at this 7 inches in from center, if you will, I'm just gonna kind of loosen up my cordage here a bit. And now I'm gonna take this little piece of metal I have, and I'm gonna just pop it through the braiding right in the center. And I wanna try to be even on both sides as much as possible, so that I've got even tension being applied across that cordage. And you'll find that when you do this, you kind of rock this little piece of metal here. I kind of rock it a bit, and it opens up a little pocket in the cordage where I'm now going to take the end that's opposite, if you will. So from the half that was up 7, this end, I'm going to just feed that shrink wrap tubing, which is acting like a fid now. I'm just going to feed that right through this cordage, pull out my little metal fid wannabe thing, and I'm just going to turn around and slide the one cordage right through the other. Yeah, now I'm going to take both ends of my shrink wrap tubing. I'm going to take those now, find where they're evenly set to each other. I'm going to walk this out again now, and when I do, I'm going to start to apply tension. And what that's going to do, I know I didn't catch this on camera the most elegantly, but what that's going to do now is turn around and say, let me just keep sliding that out. I want to go up to right where I spliced the ropes. Hopefully the camera's giving this justice. Let me just see. So hopefully you can see that I want to just apply tension here, right out to that halfway point again. And I want to figure out exactly on the other side where that rope has gone through. That's going to be right there. So I'm just going to turn around and pinch and hold it right here. Move that out of the way a bit. Now that's the spot on the alternate piece of cordage. Hopefully I'm articulating this well. That I'm going to open up a hole on this side and just make sure my little piece of metal gets through nice and clean. And like I say, try to get this on camera as clean as I can. I'm just kind of rocking it to open it up a bit so that it creates this hole where it's easier to turn around and take the little shrink wrap tubed ends and stuff them through. Now, the end that can slide on, because I've already hooked that on, that same piece of cordage, that end is the one I'm going to feed through on this side. So in essence, one side, you know, one pull of the rope went through one hole, and then you put a hole on the opposite cordage and you put the other rope through that, so that they just kind of pass through each other. And I'll come up and show this loosely before I go tightening it up so you guys can conceptually see it, because when I showed these lock brummels before, some people had a bit of a hard time kind of seeing what was happening here. So hopefully the camera is going to give this justice, but when I'm coming from the loop on the bottom here, the cordage comes up it's spliced open where the other side passes through, but then up here it passes through the splice. So both sides have a splice that kind of interlock each other. And this is called a locked brummel. And I've discussed this and showed it lots in the previous video I did. And really what I'm doing is just pulling tension up until those two splice points kind of set to each other. And then they lock at this point. So I'm locked right here. That's not going anywhere. And like I say, that's still at a 7-inch size now when it comes to the length. And I can pull on either side now. These are locked. It's almost like having a knot sitting on the line without having a knot there. It's just two splices that are kind of hooked into each other that cause them to lock together. So it's really elementary. There's not much to them. And if I walk back out of my line now, we should have it that the two ends on this side are even to each other still. So we know that we've done everything the way we wanted it, and we've created that first locked brummel in the line, which is ideal. Now the next step as I go from this locked brummel, I'm going to treat this as a fold point now, where I'm going to take my line, I'm going to apply tension, and it's going to just show me where the line would sit kind of flat if it was folded over on itself. Now right at this point in time, right at that location there, in essence, hopefully that's clear. I know it's a little bit murky when I do this stuff, but right at this point where it folds over, I just want to put an overhand knot right here. And I'm just going to feed that in right through. And I'm not going to tighten this down fully yet because I want to go back to that lock brummel and just make sure that everything's good. Now I can kind of, how I had the loop on the end, I'm just going to create a second loop because really that's what I'm wanting to do here. I'm wanting to make sure that I can double this up and have it that those two loops are the same size. So I've just got to adjust my knot a little bit here, give me a bit more room, slide it a bit more down the line, if you will. And then I want to check to see that it can double up on itself. And you can see the first locked brummel loop we did is still a bit bigger, so that's fine. I'll pull just a bit more and feed it through. And we'll just kind of slowly ease it until we know that it's at the point where I can do that. And you see how they're both the same size and length and stuff? I know I'm doing it without measurements, but it's kind of the best way to do it because you never know how much space the lock brummel is going to take and all that kind of stuff. And then I'm just going to tighten down that overhand knot. So really all I'm doing is I've got the loop from the locked brummel right here, and I just created another loop the exact same size, where if I want to double this cordage up later on in time to wrap around an object or something, I can. But my knot is right at the perfect place now, and I'm just going to apply tension on that knot. And like I said, it was just a simple overhand knot. There was nothing to it, yeah? Really elementary. And that's kind of how I'm going to start this construct now. And for the next steps, I'll shift camera angles and we'll start to walk through it. And it'll be a repeated process all the way down the line of just like I did the locked brummel here. Every 4 inches down from this knot now, I'm going to do additional locked brummels until I get close to the end where those two shrink wrap tubing, components were. So I'll shift camera angles and we'll go off and do that now, yeah? Okay, so hopefully I'll be able to show this locked brummel example again, and it'll be clear for anybody that kind of, is like, well, what the hell was he just doing there? But needless to say, right from that knot that we just tied in, I'm going to go and walk out 4 inches. I'm going to find that spot and take my little piece of metal. I'm just going to try to not catch partial strands, but try to get full groupings of them and try to be evenly halfway on the cordage so that it's all even for tension and strength and everything on both sides. And exactly as I did before. Now, like I say, I've created my little hole here. Now, I did that on the cordage that was on this side. Now I'm going to take the shrink wrap tubing end on this side, and I'm just going to open that hole a bit more, and I'm going to stuff that into where, and act like a fid, so that it splices through that part of the cordage. And I can just slide this little piece of metal out of the way so it's not distracting. And now I've just kind of fed it through where I popped the hole there. Then I'm going to take this entire side of the cordage that's on this side and feed it through that hole that was on that side. And just pull it all the way through until it's as such. Yeah. And now, like I say, this is the one that slides on the line now. So the opposite one, this one, I haven't put a hole into yet. So I'm just going to pull that out tight and straight, figure out where the distance is exactly that I'm going to want to put my little hole in the cordage. I'll slide this one back out of the way. And now I'm just going to put my hole on this side. And I, like I say, once again, just try to get it into the center of the cordage as much as possible. And then kind of twist it and open it up so that the hole becomes easier to feed the little shrink wrap tubing end through. And now I'm going to take this side, because the hole is now in the cordage that's sitting off on this side. So I'm going to take this side now and its little shrink wrap tube, and I'm going to push that through and just make it act like a fid so it forces its way to be the splice. I'll pull out that little piece of metal just to get it out of the way. And now I'll pull that all through. And you don't want any of the strands of the Kevlar to catch or anything. You want it all to be nice and clean and smooth. And like I say, I'll try to show this again on this angle now, and hopefully you guys can see where as I pull tension, those two sides just kind of slide up to each other and then they lock into place. And that's the locked brummel. And no matter how much tension I apply here, that's going to hold there. It's like a knot. It's not going anywhere. And I can do the same on this side, where if I apply tension this way, it's not going to go anywhere. So that's really just a locked point. I'm going to do this over and over again now as I walk down the next, 5 feet or whatever it is of this cordage. And I'm just going to keep repeating the same process. I'll just throw that over to that side to keep things clear. And I'll do this one more time, and then I'll go off and do it off camera, and I'll walk it out to the end so you guys aren't just watching me do locked brummels over and over again throughout this video. As much as possible, I'll try to minimize that. But like I say, just want to kind of feed it through. I take the end that's on the opposite side, I feed that through. Once you actually get it pushed all the way through the cordage. And one of the reasons why we rolled it in our hand here was, hopefully you can see this. I'll try to get it up close, where I'm catching some of the strands of the Kevlar there. The smoother you roll that in your fingers when it's still warm, the less work this will be, because it won't want to catch or hook on anything. And you'll be able to just push this through with ease. So I'm just going to slide out the little metal thing I had, get that out of the way. And now, without damaging this Kevlar cordage as much as possible, there was a few loose strands there. It's not the end of the world. But now I'm just going to pull that through and slide it all the way up. Find the tension. Say, okay, let's slide it out to where they just went through each other, or one went through the other. And now this is the one that hasn't had a hole put in it yet. So I'm going to slide that back. That's right at the point that I'm going to do it. I'm just going to pop my little bent piece of metal through. And you can see it's not really overly difficult to do or anything. This is just a bit of a time-consuming process. It does take probably half an hour, 45 minutes, maybe an hour if you're not too fast at doing these things, to kind of slide that. And now you'll see that I've got my second locked brummel in place. And you test them, make sure that it's locked and it's all working the way it should. And then that's fine. I move on to the next one now. And like I said, I'm just going to keep doing locked brummels every 4 inches down this line. So I'll cut camera angles. I'll go off and do that. And when I get close to the end, I'll cut back, yeah? All right, guys. So I went off and did the locked brummels down the line. So, like I say, kind of give a breakdown. So we've got a loop here. We created an equal sized loop here. So if I wanted to fold it over in half, I can. And then I just did an overhand knot there. And then it's just a series of these locked brummels all the way down the line. And I just kept doing them over and over and over again. Now until I get up close to the end. And because of how the lines sit and stuff, you'll find that, yeah, one might be a little longer than the other at this point in time. And that's okay. This whole design is kind of flexible in that regard. Of what I want to do at this point is really right near this end, I want to create an overhand knot again. So I'm just going to turn around and pop these through. And because I know this one had the extra cordage on it, I'm even just going to wrap it around one more time. Then we're just going to hold those together close to each other. And I'm just going to slide that overhand knot so that it sits within reason right down at the end, as such. I'm just going to apply my tension. And like I say, try to get it to be as even as you can. If it's a little tiny bit off, it's not the end of the world. It's not going to affect functionality in the least. This doesn't have to be exact science stuff. That's one of the good things about this modular design. It really is flexible. And like I say, if you were using cordage that was not braided like this, where you could do the splicing as I'm doing, you could use bank line like I showed in the previous video to do a similar effect. If you were using paracord or something like that, you'd have to switch these over to jungle knots, which I've talked about in detail in previous videos. But jungle knots are really, instead of doing the locked brummels, you're doing overhand knots all through. But so there is some flexibility when it comes to, you don't have to use this Kevlar cordage. I'm using it because it's extremely heat resistant, it's lightweight, and it's extremely strong. And from my lens, this will be a long-term durable solution to have in my bag. But needless to say, this is all there really is to this part of the modular component now. And the thinking really is, I want to go off and make an entire series of these, which I've already done previously, and that's one of the reasons why there was a bit of delay between the last video and this video. Was I went off and was doing this stuff slowly through time, and with these taking about 45 minutes to an hour each, it just takes time to do this assembly. So don't think this is a quick project that you're going to get done off in 2 hours. It's not. This really takes time, but it's very rewarding once it's done. And I'll do video examples to show the functionality and flexibility of using this modular component system. But so needless to say, I'm going to go off and do off one more of these, and then I'll show you a complete set that I plan on doing, and then we'll move into the second component that's used in this modular construct, and I'll do the detailed build out of that. Yeah, so just give me 2 seconds. Okay, so as you can see, I've turned around and made 8 of these units all together, and they're all identical to the process I just showed you. I went through the exact same step where we started off with 12-foot lengths of cordage, and when it was folded in half, we turned around and created, I'll just pull it from this end, we turned around and created the 7-inch in length loops that open up, and they all have the ability to double up on themselves cleanly as such. And then they have the locked brummels that go down the line. And then down at the end, like I say, instead of having a locked brummel at the very end, you just have your little overhand knot, or potentially you fed one side or the other through with the extra loop in the overhand knot. Really simple, really elementary. But as you can see, I've made 8 of them. So this will be the first main component of the modular system. Now I could stop and use these at this point in time, and you'll see as we go through the video why that's the case. I could stop and use these right at this point in time, and they're absolutely effective, but I definitely want to take it to the next level because I always like to do that in my projects. So needless to say, I'll kind of set all this stuff aside. We've got 8 of them now, and to give you an idea of the cordage loss, we started off as 12-foot lengths, and when we doubled it over itself, it comes to 6 foot, and with the locked brummels, it brings it down to about 5.5 feet of usable length, if you will, to this component. So you would get about a 10% loss in the doubled up length using locked brummels. If I was to do this with jungle knots, you get about a 20% loss of whatever that doubled up length is. So if you had 100 foot of cable, and you know, doubled it up on itself to bring 50. If it was jungle knots, it'd bring it down to about 40 feet. And if you're using locked brummels, it brings it down to about 45. And the locked brummels give you additional functionality over the jungle knots that you just can't achieve with them. And I'll show that out as part of the video as well. But either way, I'll set these 8 aside and we'll go on to the next component that we need that'll be attached to these units. Okay, so for the next part of this modular component build out, these parts are definitely a little less labor intensive than doing off the 8 that I just set out here. And you could do all 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. You can scale this up to whatever your requirements are. But I'm just going to grab another piece of the shrink tubing here. And now with these ones, I only want them to be small enough just to stop the fraying. They don't have to be enough to kind of grab onto or anything really. But needless to say, I'm just going to cut that in half and see maybe in half again. I only need just small little ones, yeah? They don't have to be huge. They're just enough to stop the fraying of the Kevlar cordage. And I'm going to do the exact same thing we did earlier, where just kind of poke those through. Make sure they're out the other side. Pull it back a bit, just to make sure that it's on there, right up near the edge. And the good part is, when heat comes in near contact with this Kevlar cordage, it may burn right on the tips of the fray on the ends, but near the main body of the cordage, if you will, it won't really burn out. You might get a bit of singeing and stuff, and obviously you don't want to just leave exposed open flame to it. It's never good for any type of cordage. But you can see that it really is hard to burn. It's really burn resistant. Kevlar rope is really known to be a flame retardant material, yeah? And it really will be critical when it comes to cook sets and stuff, where I'm going to have this stuff sitting in temperatures that might be 300, 400, 500 degrees Fahrenheit for, you know, extended periods of time, or an hour or two or more. And I don't want to have this cordage be compromised by the heat of a campfire. So it's really the ideal material to use. Like I said, if I went with a Dyneema or something like that, it just wouldn't make it. It would simply just melt and you'd end up ruining your whole project. So, you know, Kevlar cord is one of the few cords that you can use that kind of has the temperature resilience that's needed for these types of tasks. But all I'm really doing is, like I say, putting a little piece of that shrink wrap tubing on there just to make sure that it's not going to come loose and fray out on me. And I can even give it a bit more heat just to make sure that it's really on there good and snug. There's no harm in it. And you can see, even with direct flame right close to this cordage, it's not really doing anything damage-wise. And it just makes it really, really hot. So, you know, touching with your fingers and that kind of stuff gets challenging, right? But I'm going to measure off 32-inch lengths of this. So I'll just grab my tape measure. I'm going to want to go out 32 inches. And I'm probably not going to be able to get this elegantly on camera, but I'm just going out 32 inches. I'm going to do the same kind of thing that I did earlier, where I'm just going to take another part of this shrink tubing, just pop it on there because it's easier this way. I'm going to measure out 32 inches, cut it with the knife, and I'm going to end up moving forward with this component at that point in time. So I'll go off, sorry, I wasn't very articulate there. I'll go off, cut this 32 inches, I'll cut back, and we'll move on to the next step, yeah? All right, so like I say, I cut it to that 32-inch length, as you can see. And now I'm just gonna slide that little shrink wrap tubing there, slide that up to this end, and do the exact same thing. Just get that kind of sealed off on the end. And this just really makes sure that this cordage isn't going anywhere. It'll last for a long, long time. And hopefully you can see, I'll get this up close if I can. Even when I try to burn that Kevlar cordage, it doesn't want to stay lit. It will burn because I'm right in the tip of the flame, and it just gets above the point where the Kevlar cordage can resist But if there's heat, if you've got flame sitting even here, the heat from that isn't going to be enough to even impact this cordage. It's really, really good in that regard for heat resistance. And so needless to say, I'll just let that cool down for a second. I'll kind of move these two little bits out of the way. And the thinking really when it comes to these components that we're building right now, I'm just going to talk as this is cooling down for a second. But the thinking really is I'm going to need 16 of these. I'm going to need 2 for each one of these little modular components that we built earlier in the video, yeah? So I'll end up going off camera and doing the 16, but I'm just going to show you one in a detailed example so you know exactly how I've built them out. But I'll just see if that's cool enough. Yeah, that's cool enough now. Shouldn't be too big of a problem. So now all I'm going to do is take those, I'm going to walk them out to the halfway point, if you will. Figure out where my halfway point is. I know that that's right here. I'll grab my tape measure. Now when it comes to the measurements for these components, I'm going to go right from that point. I want to walk out 6 inches now. So I come out to the 6-inch mark, and that's where I'm going to put my little splice and put a locked brummel in. And I think I left my little splicing piece of metal. 2 seconds, I'll go grab that. So I should have really planned these things, but I was just sitting on the couch while I was making those ones off, watching a bit of TV, so you guys didn't have a bunch of repeated dead footage in the video. I'll try to make these videos as short as I can, but I know there's a lot involved when it comes to wanting to really get the whole concept across. But I'm going to do the exact same thing I did earlier, where I'm just piercing a hole into the fabric, or sorry, into the cordage, and popping the other end through. Take the 2 ends, just kind of walk up that slice so I know exactly where it's sitting. That seems to be good in that regard. Now, right at the point where they join, right there, I'm going to take the other one that hasn't had a hole put through it yet. Pop that open, and this is just, like I say, the lock brummel one more time. And I'll really try to get this up close. Let me see. Really try to get this up close to what I'm doing here. All I did was like poking the little metal fold, poking it right into the cordage, and then it just kind of sticks out the other side, and then you just kind of make sure you're not catching too much there, and try to keep it as clean and in the center as you can. And then the other end, you simply just kind of poke it through the hole you just created and drive it through. And this one, of course, it's catching now that I'm showing that up close, but hopefully you can see that. And you got to make sure you don't get it catching the little strands of fabric, like I was saying. And just kind of pull that through as cleanly as you can. And if you do catch a strand or two, it's not the end of the world, because this stuff is extremely strong. Like I say, you've got 18-pound strength cordage that's doubled up on itself. So even though this is like a thin piece of cable, you know, you're talking 3,600 pounds worth of strength, if you will, within this. This is, what, 5 times stronger than paracord would be, right? It's one of those things of... So needless to say, I put that locked brummel, though, at the 6-inch mark, and we've got that locked in now. And now I'm going to want to move from these, and they're still pretty even on that end, so I'm not doing too bad, if you will. And now I'm just going to walk down 2 inches here. So I come down the 2-inch mark. I'm going to put another locked brummel in here. And this is all adjustable stuff to your own leisure. This is just my own kind of experience with working with these things in the past has led me to come to the measurements I have out of kind of slow evolution of how I've used these types of things. So, like I say, one way or the other, I just want to put my other locked brummel in place 2 inches below the last one. I'll slide that out of there. And these ones are just catching a little more than the previous ones, but such is life, right? There we go. And you can see it's that stuff where it's not complex, it's just finicky, and it just takes time, right? So now at this point in time, I'm just going to go and find the other side. And you can see I caught a bit of it there. That'll weaken this cordage, but that's okay. Because, like I say, the cordage is excessively strong to begin with. And then beyond that, these are on kind of sub-components where they're not going to be holding the tension the same as the larger ones that we did earlier in the video. But either way, I mean, you don't want to have that fraying happen, you know, as little as possible if you can. So, but I'll just pop that through, same as I have. We're there. I've got that second locked brummel in place. Now this one's only tiny, right? This one's only a 2-inch locked brummel. And that's really there for reason of, now I'm going to walk this out and you can see one's a little longer than the other. Now down at this end, I want to leave a little bit of extra, but I'm going to just put an overhand knot now down at this end. And the one that was a bit longer, I'm going to just wrap it around one more time, and it just gives me a little tiny bit more girth to this knot that it's creating. But just kind of even up those two pieces and walk my knot out. And like I say, this can have a little bit of room on this side, and you want a half decent size on this side. And none of this is exact, you know, it's not exact measurement stuff. It's just all kind of by feel stuff. But either way, I've just set in my overhand knot now. And that's it for these components. Now the thinking really is this part, this larger loop, is going to form a prusik loop that hooks onto here. And when it comes to this knot that we just created, it's going to push through your tarp to tie out or whatever you're hooking onto. You're going to take this knot, wrap it up, push it through here, and then it's going to just cinch with tension as such and create a little locking point where you can pop it on and off. I'm going to have to, I'll go and do that off camera. I got to go put another piece of the shrink tubing on, pulled it off, but needless to say, you get the idea of what's happening here, where this is 6 inches, 2 inches, and then the remaining is just tied with a knot where you leave yourself a little bit of slack on the end, yeah? And in fact, I might even just see if I can bind both of these together on this one. But I'm going to go off, needless to say, off camera. I'll go off, and I've got to make 16 of these. So you saw the length of time it'll take. I got to do that 16 more times. I'll do that off camera, and I'll cut back when I have them. In fact, I might as well even stop and show you the kind of fire retardantness of this. So, needless to say, I just decided to hook those both together where the pieces came off, yeah? But now look, I'll take this flame directly to this Kevlar cordage. You can see the Kevlar cordage isn't melting, it's not falling apart. It's not really, it takes a lot of heat to even get that going, but it still doesn't want to stay ignited. It wants to self-extinguish. And that's kind of the nature of the Kevlar cordage. Just want to make sure this shrink wraps on there really well. And it is. And I'll just go cut off that little tiny piece that I just burned. But I just wanted to show you as an example of the level of fire retardant that this cordage has is leaps and bounds above anything you get with paracord or bank line or Dyneema or any of that stuff, right? None of those cords would be able to go through what I just showed here without just totally melting and disintegrating. You know, Kevlar is one of the few that'll actually resist. And if I come up and kind of pull on this now, I still have a lot of strength there. Even though that's been to fire, if you will, I'm pulling on that with good force, and it's still holding on, to give you an idea of the fire resistance that goes on there, right? So, but whatever, side issue. Needless to say, I'll go clean all the soot off my fingers and go off and make 15 more of these units exactly as I kind of built out that you've seen. So you can see at this point in time, I've got 4 done off. Now this took me about half an hour, maybe 45 minutes tops to get to this. So just to make off these 16, probably take you 2 or 3 hours to go off and do all 16 of them. Now they don't have to be precisely identical and everything else. This entire build is flexible that way. And as seen earlier in the video, sometimes these little heat shrinks can come off. I use the heavy duty stuff on the larger ones, and it has a glue built into it. So the heavy duty stuff is kind of more the way to go. But I wasn't worried about spending the extra money for the heavy duty stuff on these little ends here, because even if they come off and it frays, these knots one way or the other that are down on this end will stop it from fully fraying out and becoming unstable on the rope regardless. So these are really just kind of there more to act as a fid to make it easier for you when you're turning around and wanting to push the splices through and that kind of stuff. Yeah. I'm going to go off and do the other 12 now, but I just thought I'd kind of stop and make comment about, you know, roughly how long these take. They're about 7.5, 8 minutes each to give you an idea of time. So, and then depending on how many of these you make, you're going to need 2 of these for each one of these. You could go 3, but generally speaking, I would say 2 of these for each one of these. So depending on how much of the larger units you have will determine how many of the smaller ones you'll need. Yeah. So in my situation, because like I said, I've got 8 of them because I wanted to have over 40 foot in my maximum length of my ridgeline when I go to assemble this into a ridgeline. I just wanted 8 of them. I don't necessarily always want to go, 40 foot, but that's a generous amount of size between 2 trees if I wanted to go. And generally speaking, I might use 4 or 6 of these on a standard ridgeline, say 20, 30 foot in size, right? And you'll see why having a couple of these spare later on in the example, when I go out into the field and show the example of this, why that'll be so critical later on, yeah? So either way, like I say, just thought I'd stop and kind of mention the time frames of these. I'll go off and carry on building them. All right there, fellow YouTubers. So after a few hours going off and doing this, I'm back. So I've got 16 of these units now. And like I say, they had 6-inch loops with 2-inch spacings between the locked brummels. And then the remainder, which is about 6 inches, 6.5 inches, up to the knot. And then the end is just extra, right? So needless to say, I've done them all. They're pretty well the same size. They don't have to be absolutely identical. I mean, I measured everything else but when you're doing the knots and that, little variants happen and these things go on. It's not critical if they're a ½ inch off here or there. But now the next step will be 2 of these are going to end up attaching to each one of these larger units. So I'll shift camera angles, I'll set it up where I can easily attach that, and I'll show you exactly how that's done, yeah? Okay, so I've just taken one of the 5.5, 6 foot lengths that we had over here, and I've strung it up in between 2 trees just so it has a bit of tension to it. And then I took 2 of the smaller ones that we made out of the 16 that were sitting right over here, and I'm just going to hook 2 of these on. I'll do one at a time here, where all I'm going to do is put on a prusik loop. Now I've shown this in lots of previous videos where I take there's the end with the knot and the end with the loop. I'm just simply going to take the end with the knot and wrap it around as such. I'm going to do that 3 times. And this is creating a prusik knot or prusik loop. And now I'm just going to pull that down and apply some tension. And as I do that, the knot will start to dress up to itself. And that's pretty well on now. It should look like that on the one side. Hopefully the camera's picking that up all right, where from the 3 wraps, we got 3 on this side and 3 on this side, and they're all laying next to each other. Don't have them cross over with each other. And on this side, it should look as such. And the good part about the prusiks is if I apply tension in either direction, it'll automatically lock. But if there is no tension applied, I can slide this along this line with ease. So now if you remember, I put a knot up near the loop on the one end, and there was a knot down on the other. So these prusik loops will be now trapped between those 2 knots on each one of these. So my thinking really is I'm going to take the next one, and I'll just go through this one more time as the example. And I just bring the loop underneath, and then I just take the rest of it and feed it through. There's once, twice, 3 times. And as I pull and apply tension on the part down below, I'll slowly just dress it up. And as you can see, the prusik knot comes together. So the thinking really is, I now have these 2 prusik drop lines attached to, in essence, this can be a guy line, or it can be part of a ridge line, or a bunch of other things, and I'll show that in the example as soon as we take this out in the field. The thinking really though is these 2 are attached onto the one. I've got to do the same with the remainder, where 2 of the small ones are going to be attached onto each one of the larger ones, and I'm going to do that to all of them. And then once that's done, this modular system will be ready to use. And like I say, it's getting late in the day today, because this took a little longer than I thought it would when it came to the timing of doing things through the day. So I'll still keep it in the same video, but tomorrow I'll take this out into the field and show some of the flexibility of use of this. But that's my next step at this point in time, is going to be to just go off and hook on these 2 prusik loops, hook on 2 of them to one of these, and finish off my sets and get ready for tomorrow when we're out in the field, yeah? So, and I guess I'll stop and show just a single completed modular unit that can be used interactively with each other now. So like I say, this is one of those 12-foot lengths that we started with in the beginning that was, halved and came down to about 5.5 feet, that had the 7-inch loops and then a knot. And then we had the line of brummel, locked brummels running all the way to the end, where there was just a knot that sat on this side as well. And then on that line, in between this knot and the knot on the end, I put on these 2 drop lines that had the prusiks attaching to them. So fairly elementary in what I've done here. Really, the time-consuming part is going off and making these in volume. So, you could put together a single one of these, and even just as a single unit, this is an extremely useful piece of kit, and I can show that when we go out in the fields in the example. But when you start to use these together in combination with each other, you can do a lot of very interesting things where there's no knots really involved when you're out in the field, and you can reclaim all your cordage, and you get all the tension and tautness, and you get all the different functionality that you'd want. In essence, this kind of construct can replace about 99% of knot use when you're out in the field, and it can cover a wide range of things. And I really hope to kind of make that a robust part of this video, of showing a few different examples of exactly the kind of stuff that you can do and get the wheels turning in people of how far you could really go with the flexibility of this system. But like I say, one way or the other, I'll do the example tomorrow. It'll be part of this video. I'll do the example tomorrow out in the field, but I've got to just go off and finish these now and get, like I say, to those 6-foot lines, 5.5-foot lines. I've got to get all these attached onto it just as I just showed, and then we're ready to go and we're off to the races. So right there, fellow YouTubers, it's the next morning now, and as you can see, I'm out in one of my local parks in the area, and I brought along a bag with just some kit in it to help show the example today. But really, I want to go through some of the options you can use this modular Ropecraft system for now. So I'll hopefully show a good 3, 4, maybe more examples, and kind of show you the flexibility and the reusability of this entire setup. So I'll just kind of pack down here and gear up and get ready to show you the first example, yeah? Here's one of the modular units that we built out earlier in the video. As you can see, 5.5-foot length of cordage or so. There's a few mosquitoes in the area, but such is life. But I'm going to use one of these now to do a bag hang. So if you remember, we put 2 7-inch loops into the cordage at the top. So I'm simply just going to turn around, wrap around this tree, and I'm going to feed the rest of this 5.5-foot length through and let that hang. So I'm strapped onto the tree now, and now it's easy enough for me to turn around and take my bag, and I'll come up close here. Now on my bag I've got just a little loop here. Hopefully you can see that on the camera, right? Get a little loop, and it's easy enough for me to take this loop now, and the little drop lines that I put on these, to feed the knot right through that little tie off, if you will. I can put it through this way, and then I take the knot and just come back up to one of the locked brummel loops. I feed that knot through and set it on. My bag's hanging now. I can walk away hands-free. There's no problem in that regard. Now I can use either the drop line, like you see here, or if I wanted to move this entire setup further up the tree, I can turn around and instead of using the drop lines that I have, I can just use the end itself and put that through, and it'll hang a bit lower just because of the height and nature of this, but I can put it through and hook it onto here. I don't even know, let me see if the camera's even seeing where the bag's hanging. Yeah, the bag's way down too low, but you can see I've got multiple options for being able to strap onto the tree. In this situation, it's better off to just have it where those drop lines that we made with the Prussics, I'm just going to slide that right up near the top here where I've got it set. And like I say, I can just feed it either through the little loop that I had on the bag, or hand grab, if you will, or anything you've got on your backpack, or I can just go right through both arms of the backpack itself. And like I say, I just open up one of these locked brummels and then just feed the knot through. I'll do a close-up of that, and now my bag's up, it's off the ground, and I don't have to worry about any moisture or anything from the earth. And I didn't really have to tie any knots here. I simply just used the kit, yeah? So let me see if the camera got that. Yeah. And like I say, this is hanging right now, this is hanging right at the perfect height for me, where I can just get into my bag with ease and start getting access to my kit, yeah? So, but this is all easily adjustable. If I wanted it to be higher up, I can simply just loosen this a bit, shift it up on the tree, and now my bag's sitting up a little bit higher, you know? So it's really flexible and easy, and because there was no knots in any of this being used, I can simply just pop it off the tree when it's time to go. I take my bag back on my backpack, I pull this loop and just free up all my cordage, and you can see I'm off the tree. It's really just that simple. I'm going to put this back up because there's a few other examples I want to show. Obviously, you know, this video is all about the examples, but I'm just going to put that back up there again. And you can see the simplicity of what I'm doing. And in many previous videos I've shown using toggles with marlin spike hitches and those types of things. This replaces all of that. This makes it that I don't have to tie any knots or have any foreign material off the land, if you will, that I'm using as part of my kit. It's just unnecessary. And it's just that simple. And I can tug on this to the point where I'd rip this right off before this would give. It was like I was saying earlier in the video, this is a 3,600 pound test now that it's been doubled up on itself. This line's not going to break. It's not going anywhere. But either way, I'll shift now and I'll show some other further examples. But there's a simple bag hang you can do. So I'll stop at this point in time and I'll show a real close-up of what I've done here, yeah? So if you remember in the build-out part, we had these Prussic loops that we had tied on. We're just looking at everything sideways. We had these little Prussic drop lines that we had put on. So I'm just gonna slide that on the line, and I'll show this out further in detail as we go through the example, but I just slide it up the line, and now if I pull on that, the Prussic will lock it. And let me step you back a little tiny bit here. I really want you guys to get it as close as you can without missing the details and that kind of stuff. But as you can see here, this Prussic, I can turn around and slide this Prussic along the line freely. But as soon as I apply tension on that line and pull down, this Prussic will lock and hold. It's not going anywhere. So it allows me to kind of have an adjustable point along this line to set the height of the bag wherever I want it to be. And I'll just park it in the best I can to kind of really keep it all in camera. And I'll just grab my bag now. And all I've really done with the bag is, like I said, I had that little loop in the bag there. And all I'm doing is, on that drop line, we had tied a knot right on the very end. I'm feeding that through the little hole I've got, little tie off, if you will, that I've got on my backpack. And it's only a tiny one. You can see the flexibility of this, but needless to say, this knot now, I'm gonna walk up on the same drop line, and I'm going to open up one of these brummels that we had tied, and I'm just going to take the knot and feed it through that locked brummel. Now the tension on the line from the weight of it will pull these back closed again and lock that knot so it's not going anywhere. It has nowhere to escape. And I can apply all the tension in the world. I'll pull here so I don't break the bag. I can apply all the tension in the world I want here, and it's not going anywhere. But if I want to get this off, it's as simple as just pushing the knot back out through that locked brummel, and my bag is free. So hopefully that was clear. I'll try to show a few more examples as we go of doing this with some variants where when we use it as a trucker's hitch and other things later on in the video. But either way, you can see really elementary, and there was no knots needed for me to get this securely attached to the tree. Yeah. And then the rest of it is just that 5.5 foot length, where I've even got another prusik, because we put 2 on each, if you remember. I've got another prusik. If I wanted to hang another secondary object here, it'd be easy enough for me to do that as well. Yeah. So that's the first example I wanted to show, and hopefully the camera caught that clear enough with up close detail. I'll move on to the next example. Okay, so in this example, I've got another single one of these modular systems components that we built out earlier in the video. And if you remember, we had larger loops that we tied in at the beginning. They were like 7-inch loops, yeah? And then we made it where you could double up on themselves. And hopefully everybody remembers how we could double those up with ease, yeah? So, and I've shown this technique in lots of previous bushcraft videos of mine. So if you've watched any of the previous bushcraft stuff, this will be familiar terrain to you. But for people that haven't watched those things, hopefully you'll get something new out of this. So I've got 3 sticks on the ground, and these sticks, to give you an idea, within reason, my height maybe a bit longer. So we're talking about 6 foot, and you know, you can go 6.5 foot. It's okay. It's fairly flexible. But the main thing is really you're looking for diameters at the thin end of the stick, if you will, to be roughly about the size of your thumb. That's kind of the target you're aiming for. And you know, scouts and boy scouts and all that kind of stuff, they teach how to do lashing and that kind of stuff, but I don't use any of that. To me, that's, I don't know, it's not even worth teaching in my perspective. But needless to say, this is a rapid way to kind of replace the idea of doing lashing at all when it comes to simple things like tripods and that kind of stuff. So I'm going to take those loops that we had, then just double them up on themselves, so that I've got 2 of them now. And I'm going to take these sticks that I have, and like I say, I've got 3 of them here, and I'm just simply going to feed the loop right through the end of all 3 of these sticks and slide it down about 6 inches or so, give or take. Like I say, this isn't exact science stuff. And I'm going to make sure that that loop is now sitting, you know, within reason, down a half decent amount, you know, good arm span away from the top, if you will. And then I'm just going to take the middle stick, and I'm going to start rotating this middle stick here. And all I'm doing is just spinning it as I go here. So I just want to make sure everything's caught well. There we go. And as I spin this now, it'll start to apply tension to these loops. And like I say, no knots needed here. Simple spinning of the sticks, that's all we're doing. And you turn it 2 or 3 times. I really should have cleaned these sticks up a bit more, but whatever, such is life. But you twist it 2 or 3 times to the point where the loops that we doubled up start to bind up on each other, and you now have a tripod. In fact, I'll even go one more just to make it a little tighter. You now have a tripod without having to get in all to the lashings and all that kind of stuff that's time consuming and uses up a lot of cordage in a matter of seconds. And now this tripod, I can use tripods obviously for a plethora of things when I'm out in the field. But one of the things I can use this tripod for now, and I'm just going to slide up the drop lines that we had, just slide those up a little higher. Now I can use this tripod as a cooking tool over the fire, and I've shown that, like I say, in lots of previous videos. So I'll just grab an example now of, I've got my cook kit in the bag, but I'll just grab the example of this cook kit that I have here, and I won't bother pulling it fully out, but just to give you an idea of how you hang this. So I've got the knot that sits down at the bottom of this. I simply feed it through the handle of my pot, and I can bring it up and I can set it, and I'll show close-ups of this too, and I can set it where I hook it right into one of these Prusik drop lines to give me the tension and to lock it. And now, if I want to adjust the height of this pot, yeah, I can move my legs of my tripod, but I can also just slide my Prusik up and down that line, and it'll automatically start to adjust the height in which this pot is going to sit over the fire. And this is really, really flexible. There's 101 ways I can do this. If I don't like how low everything's hanging because my sticks were just low, or whatever the conditions are, it's easy enough to take the main line here and just bring it over the top a couple times just to shorten your length. And now all of a sudden I'll go once more. Now all of a sudden my drop line to hang my pot has raised as well overall. So there's a flexibility in that regard, and I can easily turn around and do exactly as I'm saying, where I just slide the knot at the end of the line through my handle on my pot and just slide it up, pick a locked brummel that I want to feed through, and just set it in place. So it's really elementary. And then, like I say, I can still use my tripod to adjust the height and the position of things. But as you can see, I was able to do a full cook kit setup in a matter of seconds without having to tie any knots or any of that business. And I'll come in close and show the details of some of the adjustability that you can get going on here, just to make sure that it's really clear. But as you can see, these tripods are really elementary, and I didn't have to waste a ton of cordage doing lashing and all that kind of stuff. That's just not needed with this kind of modular system, yeah? But I'll shift camera angles and I'll come in closer and show you detail of the flexibility here. Okay, so first I'll just show you the basic single line, and then I'll show you the Prusik drop line being incorporated in for the flexibility. So all this really is like I say, the knot on the end that I have here is just feeding through some of these locked brummel spaces that we've put all the way along the line. I pick one of them that I want to put that into, and I simply, I'll do it lower so it's on the camera, I simply just feed that knot through, and I even let that tag sit out so I can quick release and just pull that later and pop it back out. So that's one of the quickest ways, where, like I say, that's just a simple hook onto the pot handle, a bail handle of the pot, and off you go. If I wanted this to be a little more flexible, I can easily, I'll just slide this into position now. Now, in fact, I'll switch camera angles just to kind of get this next part better. But you can see how easy it was with just the single line. And then, like I say, I'll shift camera angles and give you a better angle on the other one. Okay, so now, like I say, I've got that drop line that's sitting there, and because it's on the Prusik, I can easily just slide that to whatever position I want, yeah? And what I can do, instead of the main 5.5 foot line, instead of it's not hooking into itself, its own line, I can just hook it into one of these Prusik lines. And I open up one of the little brummels that I have there, and I feed the knot through, and now that's connected onto the Prusik, and I can even pull that through if I'm worried about it, right? And now that's connected onto the Prusik line here, where I can now adjust this Prusik line and just slide it, and as I do so, it adjusts the height that pot is sitting at overall above the fire, and it gives me a level of flexibility there without having a bunch of cordage dangling and hanging into the fire and all that kind of stuff, yeah? So hopefully that becomes clear of there's definitely some flexible options you can do with this, and having these little Prusik drop lines on allows you to give a really granular level adjustability, but still maintain tension and all that kind of stuff with ease. And all I'm doing is simply sliding that Prusik up and down the line. That's all there is to it. And if I want to pop all this stuff off, I'll just slide this back up a little bit. If I want to pop all of this back off, it's easy enough to just pop that out. I'm off, and now my cooking pot's free. And I didn't have to tie any knots here. It's all just free and easy to do. And you can see that all it is just my little modular system where I'm taking advantage of one of my drop lines now rather than just the main feed line. But I'll just leave this hanging, and we'll move on to the next part of the examples and show you some more stuff, yeah? But hopefully you managed to, see all that with good clarity in that. I know it's always tricky when I'm out in the bush and, the light shining through the trees and all that kind of stuff, It's not always ideal, but one way or the other, hopefully this example was clean to you, and we'll move on to the next one. Well, if you hear any noise in the background, this is a public park, so there's people wandering about, just so you're aware. But, you know, quite often when you're out in bushcraft situations, you want to set up just a short length line to kind of hang stuff and get stuff off the ground. So I've got 2 of these units now, and I'm simply going to turn around and hook the one unit onto the tree on this side, and exactly as I've shown before, where in fact I'll just keep these prussics on this side of the tree just for simplicity's sake, and I might have use for those later, we'll see, but I'll just move those along the line a bit. But yeah, I'm just going to hook onto this side of the tree now, and you can see I don't have enough length to get across and to fully get to this side. Yeah, so that's not a problem though, because these modular systems can interconnect with each other, and that's one of the I just got to loosen that prussic a bit so it slides easier. It's on there just a little tight, but needless to say, I'll do a close-up of this too. But if I want to daisy chain these now, the end that has the knot on it, it's easy enough for me to take the loop that's on another length that I have and just do a little lark's head knot here and hook it on to that knot and just apply a bit of tension. I'm locked, and that's on now. And now I can daisy chain these out so that I can go as long as I want with them, really. And I'll show that an example as we go when we do out the full ridge line of having, you know, multiples of these established. But now I have enough length where I can easily come around the tree, and I'll try to stay back in the camera here. I'll easily come around the tree, and other than that one lark's head knot that I did here, there's not really any knots needed. And what I can do is come up and stick the end of the second line. I stick that through one of the locked brummel loops, and I pull it back now, and it allows me to apply tension just like a trucker's hitch. And then I can take that knot that's on here and just stick it into another locked brummel that's on this line and have whatever tension I want, really. I'll just hook onto this prussic just because I don't want to make it too tight. And one of the good parts about this Kevlar line is there's not a lot of slack like you'd have in paracord. Paracord, when you apply tension to it, if it gets wet or any of that business, there can be a lot of sag in the line. I've got my arms fully resting on this line. There's not a lot of slack, but I'll go grab a couple items now to hang from this, and you can see how easy it is to kind of get up off the dirt, if you will, and make it that you're not, you don't have everything down at ground level. You get it up closer to your chest where it's more comfortable to work with. So I'll go grab a few items and we'll strap them up and hang them on this, and I'll show an example of that as well, and I'll do that up close. But first off, I'll come up and show you exactly what I did here to hook these together, and then how I applied the tension so that it's really taut and firm and not going anywhere. Yeah, so I'll shift camera angles and then I'll show you that. Okay, so the first thing I'll show you now is how I attach and detach these units so that you can kind of daisy chain them together. All it is a simple lark's head knot that I hook them together. And you can see they're detached now, they're separated from each other. But on the end that had the knot on it, on the one, I simply take the other one that had the loop, and I take that loop and I kind of roll it in on itself as such, so that it creates like a little pocket like that, where it would just slide on the line. Yeah, and I take the knot, then just feed it through and allow the tension to form, and now it'll tighten up right here. It'll tighten up behind that knot and join those together. So it allows me to kind of rapidly join together multiples of these modular systems and daisy chain them along, and yet still have it where I can easily turn around, and if I want to take it off, I simply turn around and pull right here. It loosens the tension and allows that to all just free back up, and they're independent again. So like I say, I'll show that one more time, where I stick 2 fingers in, kind of roll it as such, and then just pull it like that. And that's called a lark's head knot. And it allows me to just feed these through and cinch them to each other, and they're not going anywhere. They're in essence the same as it would be if you had a single line. Yeah. So that's exactly how I kind of daisy chain these together, and then I'll stop and show angles of how I apply that trucker's hitch kind of tension here. Yeah. Okay, so I'll stand on this side of the camera to kind of keep myself out of the view of what's happening here. So I'm just going to turn around and take the knot that's on the end of one of these modular components, and I'm going to walk this up a bit In fact, I'll just slide that forward just to keep it free. But I'm going to slide this up a bit till I find a place where I want to kind of tension this off, yeah? So I'm going to take this knot, and I've got a loop, you know, one of the locked brummels. I'm just going to feed the knot right through it entirely so that I'm 100% through, and now I'm just going to pull on that knot and start to apply tension. Oh, I got to slide that back a bit. And as I apply tension, it's just like a trucker's hitch right at this point. I can apply all the tension you would like a normal trucker's hitch with ease and get it as tight as I want it to be. And now when it comes to this knot now on this part of the line, I'm just going to look for a locked brummel that I can hook into with ease. So in this example, I'm just going to use one of the drop lines and one of its locked brummels and hook onto it. And as soon as I do that, the tension will cinch everything up. This is locked, and this is extremely taut now. This line's not going anywhere, and I still have the adjustability of these prosecks, where if I wanted to put stuff and hang stuff on these lines, I can do so with ease without it, you know, any complications really in that regard. It's purely elementary to do these types of things. And if I want to pop this back off again, it's as simple as I just push that knot back through the locked brummel, or locked brummel there. It's off. I open up that locked brummel here, and I'm off the tree. There was no knots needed to set this up and to give me all the tension that I wanted, right? And I'll show you in a further example how you can apply even more tension than this. But like I say, one of the good parts about using the Kevlar rope is the reality that it doesn't have the stretch nearly the same as, like, say, a paracord would. So when you apply tension and you tighten this off, it doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't want to sag as you apply weight to this. So I'll go grab a few items now, and I'll show you, you know, hanging things onto this and using it as a line to kind of get your gear up off the ground so you're not just down at dirt level with everything, yeah? So let me shift camera angles, go grab a few things, and then I'll show you a few of those examples as well. So now I'll just use a few simple examples to show you kind of hanging stuff off of this line, yeah? So what I have here is just a water bottle, and I've got a loop of cordage. I do that same lark's head knot there, and I showed this in the previous video, and I just hook that onto the lip of the water bottle, and it really just gives me now a knot that I can turn around and incorporate into this locked brummels, where I can just set that and hold it. It's on the line. That's not going anywhere. Now it's just that easy to do this with just about any piece of kit you have. Or if you have things like, you know, towels and that kind of stuff, and you want to hang them up, it's easy enough to just turn around and take a corner of the towel, feed it through one of these locked brummels, and the tension of the locked brummel will kind of bite this almost like a clothespin would. And you can turn around and take the other end, string it up. In fact, I'll just move that one there. String it up and feed the other end through, and you can see it's easy enough for me to do things like hanging up clothes and that kind of stuff without the need for any clothespins or any of that business. There's, in the previous video, I showed a few more examples of things you could hang and that kind of stuff. This really is very flexible. If you have saws or axes or anything and you want to have kind of an organized area, this is the kind of construct that makes that really elementary to do, yeah? So I won't go off with further examples of hanging stuff, because to me it's pretty self-evident, other than the fact of, you know, you can turn around and say, if I didn't want to hook into the locked brummels as I've just shown in both these examples, these drop lines here, I can do the exact same thing where I just hook my knot through and I just connect it into the locked brummel, and I'm on. And that water bottle's hanging now at this position, and because that's on a prosec, if I want to kind of position and slide these things along the line, I can, and that's really elementary to do too, right? So there's a lot of flexibility in being able to just use these lines to kind of do things such as this without any real knots or anything needed. Yeah, we had the lark's head knot to join these two together, but everything else was pretty elementary to do. You know, we're using the lark's head knot itself is one of the most elementary knots you can use when you're out in the field, so it makes it really easy. You know, even if you got gloves on and it's cold and stuff, you could still apply all these trucker hitches and do all these types of things with ease without having to tie any knots. So needless to say, you can do it to short lengths like this, or you can do it stepping up to the next example, like the full length of a ridgeline, yeah? So I'll stop and make that as the next show. So if you remember in the build out now, I did 8 in total, and we've only shown an example of using 4 of them at this point in time. So what I have here though is the other 4, and they've already been daisy chained together, just like I've shown in the previous video or previous scenes. And I'm going to now use this as a ridgeline kind of construct, and potentially I'll pull down the rope line and extend this just to show you some additional features and functionality. But there's 2 stumps. I got one here and one down there, and I'll string this up now between these 2 and do an example of a ridgeline, and show you that this is done up like a rapid release bundle at this point in time. And I've shown that in lots of previous videos that I've put out of exactly how this done. Now it catches a little bit more in this construct than it does in those because of the nature of this modular system, but it still does work, and you can still do rapid release bundles exactly as I've shown in previous videos. But like I say, I'll go off and slap up this ridgeline between these 2, and then we'll kind of go further in the video. Yeah, so it's really simple. Just come down to this end, and I'll show close-ups of what I'm doing here. I'll walk through it all, but I simply want to just hook onto this beam, or pole if you will, tree trunk, however you want to look at that, and just feed my knot through my locked brummel, apply my tension, and now that's on. It's not going anywhere. And as I go, I can simply pull everything out just like I've shown in previous videos of the rapid release, and come out to this side. And like I say, it will catch a little bit more because there's more involved in this modular system, but you can see even when I daisy chain together multiples of these to become a ridgeline, it still has the flexibility where I can do these rapid release bundles. And it allows me where, in essence, what I'll end up doing is turning around and creating 2 rapid release bundles that I just have sitting in my bag, 4 lines of each, and then I can break it apart and use it for whatever I want later on in time. But it allows me to just kind of package it all up into a nice kit in my bag. Yeah, so I'm just going to simply turn around and take one of the drop lines now, because we're right at the edge of the length here between these trees, of the length of what I have still available for my cordage. And like I say, I'll expand it with that line that was hanging up the clothes and stuff and show you some further examples. But one way or the other, I'm just going to pull the drop line right down towards the end where I'm running out of room, and I'm just going to feed one of the other drop lines that I have here. I'm going to feed the knot of it through the other and allow that to have some tension. And now what this allows me to do is these prosecks, now I can use them as tensioners instead of a trucker's hitch setup, where if I don't necessarily want to worry about having extreme amounts of tension, I can simply just slide these prosecks and it'll pull tension to the line. And one way or the other, this is a taut line and my ridgeline is set up, and you can see there was nothing involved to it really. There was no real knots needed or any of that business when I was, doing its construct. And when it comes to all these little drop lines, because I used locked brummels here, it allows me to slide these a substantial distance between the knots, because these are 5.5 foot segments with a knot on one end and a knot on the other. These little prosec drop lines have a half decent amount of room that I can shift and adjust them without having to worry about them catching on a knot. But like I say, at any point I can just pull and apply tension, and that locks. It's holding, it's not going to go anywhere, and I can still slide it if I release that tension and move it to wherever I want. So I'll stop and do the close-ups of exactly what I did on both ends, so that's all clear to you guys, and then I'll show how to do kind of an advanced tension that goes well beyond a trucker's hitch and allows you to just apply absurdly tight amounts of tension to this, almost like it was structural really. And given that this is now what, 3,600 pound strength, I can use this to do heavy duty stuff that paracord or any of that, bank line wouldn't be able to handle it. But needless to say, I'll stop and show those knots now. Yeah, so I'll shift scenes. So I'm just back up to the first side that I initially hooked up here, and I'll just show you. These are all rapid release. If I pop that, I'm off. We're done. I'm off that tree entirely. And I've got one of those drop lines here, and all I've done is come around, and I can, with the knot, I can just come around and come up to one of these locked brummels. I'll just slide the prosec out of the way. I can come up to one of these locked brummels, and I can just feed that knot through right there and just let the tension hold it. and it'll hold as simple as that. There's nothing else I need to do. As the tension gets applied to the line, these lock brummels will just cinch in on the back side of this knot and give it that it has nowhere to go. But because I like having kind of flexibility with being able to shift things up and down and that kind of stuff, quite often I'll just, and I have lots of these extra prussiks, quite often what I'll end up doing is just moving my prusik and using that instead on this side, where I take that same knot and I bring up one of my drop lines and I just feed the knot of the knot through the locked brummel on the drop line and hook it on as such. And that's still a quick release here, so I can pull that out and get it off. But it allows me now, make sure the camera is getting this, it allows me now to just slide this prusik along that line and pull tension. And I'm probably going off camera here, so maybe I'll just shift you a little bit. Sorry, the bumpy stuff, but such is life. And you can see now my prussik's here. As I slide, I can just apply tension and let all feed, and it'll just hold and be taut wherever I set it. And if I want to break the tension on this point, I can either just pull on this quick release and have that all come out exactly as I showed right in the beginning of the scene, or I can just slide this prusik back towards the tree, and now it's loose. Now I can adjust this on the tree where I want it to be, yeah? So I can adjust my height up and down and that kind of stuff, and I can adjust my tension with ease just by tweaking it. And like I say, there's definitely multiple ways you can hook this on at this point. It's really flexible in that regard, and the key part is it didn't take any knots to get there. It's simply stuffing a knot through a loop. It's just that easy. And now I'll shift back to the other side where I connected on once this side had been established, yeah? So now I'll come back up to this side and show you kind of a few of the different things that you can do on this end, yeah? So needless to say, I'll just quick release this and I'm off. It's just that simple. I'm free from this side. And what I've done really is, on this end, all I did was one of these drop lines, I had it slid up to the end. Because if I turn around and come around here, let me just slide that down a bit. I can just use the end of the line itself and bring that up and just find a happy place where it's tight and I'm on and I'm hooked. And the tension will just keep that closed. That's rigid, that's on. You know, within reason, it's fairly loose though. Don't necessarily like that. And because it was so tight here, I wanted a bit of room to work with. So what I can do is just simply push this back through as such. It all just quick releases and I come off. And I'm going to slide one of my drop lines right up to the end here of this cordage, or right near the end. And I'm going to use that as I come around instead. And now it has a knot on the end of the drop line. The drop line would have been there, if you will. It has its own knot on the end of it. And I just hooked into one of the other drop lines that are on here, because we've got them all down the line, yeah? I just turned around and fed my knot through the locked brummel hole. I allow there to be a bit of tension so I know that that's not going to give and slip. And now I can slide that prusik along the line and I can use that to apply tension. And I can apply a half decent amount of tension. It's not as much as a trucker's hitch, but in 90% of the situations, that level of tension there is enough to do everything I need it to do. And it puts me in a good space that way, where this is all quick release. It was easy enough to set up. I've got flexibility with the prussiks to adjust the tension as needed, yeah? But what I'll do is I'll stop now and show an additional line attached, and show that if you've got the extra length of line connected just by daisy chaining on another one of these, that I can do the leverage system, which goes well beyond a trucker's hitch. So there's a lot of different ways you can set this up. One of the key things is it's good to have it that even under tension here, if I pull on that, it's quick release, I'm done. I'm off. If I want to get that, I gotta actually loosen my prusik now. If I want to get that off the line, even though it's got full load on it, I can do that with ease. And that's one of the key aspects of the usefulness of this system, yeah? So I'll just leave it at this, and I'll go and grab the other line and we'll extend it, and I'll show you the more advanced tensioning technique that's way, way stronger than a trucker's hitch, yeah? Okay, so I already tore down that line that we had the water and the towel hanging on and that kind of stuff, just to regain one of my modular Ropecraft components. But I'm just going to quick release this now, so we're off. And if you remember, I hooked this on with one of these rustic drop lines, so I'm just going to slide that around and get it kind of out of the way. Yeah, and just like I showed earlier in the video, I'm going to turn around and take one of these modular components with the loop end. I'm just going to create a little lark's head knot. I'm going to feed it through so that the knot's fed through, apply tension, and daisy chain on this modular component. And now when it comes to getting excessive amounts of tension in these lines, I'm just going to set this on here for 2 seconds and wrap around so I can keep the camera clean as possible here, and just work on this side. But like I was saying earlier in the video, you can turn around and pull at this point in time. Here, let me just pop that back out. I can turn around and open up any one of these locked brummels. I can just feed my line through and start to apply tension here like I would a trucker's hitch, and I can start to get excessive amounts of tension on that line. And it's elementary to do, and I could stop at this point in time and just feed this into a locked brummel that's sitting on this side, and I'm in. And this is effective. It's super tight right now. I could easily put a full loads onto this without issue. But if I wanted to kind of take it to the level of absurdity, then just get ridiculous amounts of tension on here, I'll just pop this back out of this locked brummel and make sure that this is all sliding okay, because it gets so tight from the tension. The locked brummels just almost pinch on that without a knot. They'll just pinch on it to the degree where it's not going anywhere one way or the other. But what you can do is this side that comes through, if I want to gain just a little bit more leverage, I can easily, this is the side that fed through the main line, I can easily take the knot of it as such. I can take the knot of it, just come up to a locked brummel that's above here, push it through and pull back now, and pull back this way, and it starts to become just absurdly tight to the degree it just becomes ridiculous. But I can pull back this way and I'll see if I can find a locked brummel to hook into where I'm on, and it's on so tight it won't even let the line slide, because the locked brummels are pinching it so hard it won't even let this part slide on the line. And the tension on this is obscene. It's just ridiculous. I don't ever really need to have this level of tension, but for the guys out there that are all about like, oh, I want the hardest ridgeline on the planet and blah blah blah, well, you can have it. I can pull this way, it pulls on the first trucker's hitch, then I can pull this way and it pulls on the second. And like I say, to even open those locked brummels, to get it in, it's difficult because the tension is so firm. It just wants to lock and hold the lines of the locked brummel. It just wants to pinch them so tight together it's hard to even get a knot through. But either way, we're on here, and I'll just grab the camera and show you how clean it looks. There's not much difference in kind of look of things, if you will. I'll just shift in a bit here, and you can see this double leveraging point. Let me see if I can get you in the full scope of the camera there. So you can see I'm leveraged on at this point, and then I'm leveraged on at this point, and it's all clean the way it hooks. But the amount of tension that's on here, it's just absurd. I'll even shift the camera back and I'll put my full body weight on it. I'll sit on that spot just to show you that even though these are all quick release and that, these knots aren't going anywhere. This stuff is all rock solid and stable. Now, I'll turn around and just put my full body weight. I got my phone in my pocket, hold on. I'll slide that up there. I'll put my full body weight on here. I'm sitting, and this is holding. None of these quick release knots are giving. So if you're worried about, you know, the amount of tension you're applying and it's only little knots that are holding on to everything, you can see I'm a 230-pound guy. It's holding me without issue. If anything, putting this tension on here has probably made it that I could adjust this and pull it even further. I won't bother because I don't want to, you know, just make it that it's so tight that I can have a hard time getting it off. But you can see this double leverage point. I don't know of another ridgeline system that even allows you to do this kind of stuff, and it keeps it clean. I don't have stuff going all over the place other than these drop lines that are all adjustable, and I can slide them up and down the line. And if you've watched previous videos of mine, you'll see where I use these drop lines now to do quick release to tarps and other things. I can use this as a fishing kit to do like full trot lines for fishing. I did a video on that. The multi-purpose use of having this kind of system. I might even do more examples in future videos of things, but I'll show one more example or two more examples in this video, and I'll start to wrap it up because I know it's getting long. But you can see this modular Ropecraft system, in my perspective, is unmatched to anything. I was able to hang bags, set up tripods, set up ridge lines, put up stuff to hang my gear and stuff, and I was able to do it all with no knots and have it all where this is all quick release stuff. I can pop that back out here, and really the only thing even stopping the quick release at all here is the tension on the lines is so extreme. The locked brummels are actually holding and wanting to stick to things. But you can see it wasn't complex for me to loosen this off. I'm back off the tree again, 100%. And if I want to get one of my components back, it's as simple as pulling on this. I slide that out and I'm back down. I can just take that and reclaim it to use it for however I want and switch it up, where this prusik is now the one that's going to hold this ridgeline. And it's tight. That's not going anywhere. That's a firm ridgeline. And now I've just freed up this component to use it for some other task. So there's literally hundreds of different things I can do with this modular system. And but I'll stop and talk now about just the usefulness of a single one of these, or 2 or 3 of these, without getting into a full kit of like 8 or 10 of them. Yeah. So now I'll just quickly throw up one of my tarps as an example of, I've done this in previous videos with similar kind of constructs, the ultimate ridge lines and those types of things. But I'll turn around and just hook up this tarp to show kind of the speed of things. Now all I'm going to do is turn around and take these drop lines, take the knot, I'm going to feed it through one of my tie outs on the tarp, and then just put it back onto its own locked brummel, set it in and apply a bit of tension. Now I'm on to that point, and as I walk things out, I just want to figure out which side I want to go with. So in order to fit it into the camera relatively cleanly, I'll take this tie-out point. I'm just going to come up to one of the other prusiks that we've got sitting on the line here. I'm just going to feed it through on this side. And put it through its own locked brummel. And now this tarp is hooked on. It's really just that easy. And if I want to adjust the position of it, it's easy enough for me to just slide on my prusiks. It moves it this way a couple inches, and then I can come over to the other prusik and just pull on this side and reapply that tension, and it'll become taut and firm. I have no issue in that regard. Now I'll just grab a couple tent stakes out of my bag here. I think I got a couple of them, just to quickly do off this side, and then I'll show a few examples of each one of these individual modular components. Doesn't just daisy chain to become a ridge line, it can also act as an active guy line. So what I'll do is I'll just peg out one of these corners with a tent peg and just kind of come square to both of those and just set that in place. And now on this corner, I'll stop and shift camera angles, and I'll take one of the other modular components here, and I'll show you some of the varied tasks you can do for this fourth corner to give you options of using this as a guy line, and the different functionality and flexibility that exists just in having one of these single modular components in that aspect. Yeah. So let me just shift camera angles and then I'll cut. Like I say, there's definitely multiple options that can exist on this end using one of these as well. And one of the things I can do, and I'll do close-ups as I go here, but one of the things I can do is just take the loop that's on this, feed it right through the tie-out point as such, so that I'm on, and then just pull the rest of the line through now, and I'm strapped to this corner. It's tied off now, and it's easy enough for me to come out at a distance. Hopefully I'm catching this all on the camera. To come out at the distance, and I don't even have to be rigid to where I'm going to put my tent peg. I can just stick it in the ground at some location over here. And as long as it's less than the full length of my guy line, I can adjust this prusik that I have and just slide that on the line and position it to where I want it, and turn around and say, all right, I'll take the loop of that drop line, because we had loops in the locked brummels, just hook that onto the tent peg, and then just slide that prusik along the line and apply tension. And this tarp is fully taut right like this, and it's not going anywhere. So you can see these modular components can be used as adjustable guy lines as well, that are really, really flexible in that regard. And what I'll do is I'll stop and I'll shift camera angles and show some of the options that we can do when using these as a guy line. Okay, so I shifted the camera angles in a little tighter here, so hopefully you guys can see what I'm up to better. And when it comes to the tensions now that are on this, if I want to loosen this, I simply slide this prusik back that way, the tension comes off, and I can just pop this off and it's free. And that's, you know, one of the good parts about that. And when it comes to this end, what I did in this current example is I'll just pull back out and redo it and show you so you can see the full effect of it, where all I did was I took one of these modular components now, and the tie-out line that exists here, I simply took the loop end, I fed it through that tie-out, and then when I got a big enough part of the loop through, I just grabbed the rest of it and fed it through. And you can use this kind of construct to keep things permanently lashed off to the tarp. And then, like I said, I just walked it back out here, and all I did was turn around and say, all right, take one of these prusik drop lines, hooked it onto the tent peg, and then just slid it along this line and allowed it to apply tension. And it gives me adjustable guy lines with ease in that regard, yeah? So I can go that way. This is one of the constructs that exists that you can use. And then I'll show a few other varied examples right in this same zone. So I'll just loosen this off again here and just pop this back out. And you can see, really elementary and really flexible in that regard. Now when it comes to this end of things, if I didn't want to have this be permanently on there, it's easy enough for me to turn around and slide that all back out for a second. Now it's easy enough for me to turn around and say, instead of sticking the loop through and feeding all the line through itself, all I have to do is stick the loop through, get it far enough that that knot's through, and then take the knot and hook it on one of the locked brummels here. And I can make this now, instead of a permanent attachment, I can make this now quick release. So when I apply tension, if I want to pop this, I simply pop it and it comes off. So you can have flexibility in that regard, where we'll just, like I say, hook that back on and apply tension so I know that it's being held. And now I could do the same on this end. I don't have to use either one of these prusik drop lines. Just slide that out of the way completely, and I'll just take the knot that's down on this end. I kind of pull on the line. Oh, look, I pulled so hard it broke the tent peg. Well, there's that. Let me see, I'll go grab my other tent peg. Give me 2 seconds. I'll cut back. Okay, just swapped up the tent peg. Sorry about that. These things happen sometimes. It's always when I'm doing recordings, right? So needless to say, I put the quick release on this side already. Now down on this end, instead of using these drop lines at all, I'm just gonna wrap around here. I'm gonna come up, slide those prusiks out of the way a bit. That one's on a little tight, so they're easy enough to loosen though, and just get them out of the way. And the thinking really is, I just want to take the knot, slide it up until I get to a decent tension, and slip it through that lock brummel and let it sit. Now both ends of this become quick release. So if I want to pop this off, I can simply turn around and pop that and the whole thing comes loose, right? And it's the same on the other end. I'll just apply tension again, get it back to the point where it was at. Just set that in place. And that's all, you know, it's tight, it's not going anywhere. And on this end, if I wanted to pop it, I simply pull that, it becomes loose. I slip the knot and it's off. So one way or the other, I don't have to have it where these lines are hard lined on there. I can keep it all quick release so it stays as a flexible construct. And you can see it's easy enough to just put it back on there under tension with no knots involved. That's really, really elementary in that regard, yeah? And one of the other things I'll stop and talk about too is using these drop lines themselves. I'll have to adjust my tent peg and its positioning, but we'll stop and we'll pull off one of these little drop lines. And in order to pull that off, I'll stop and do a close-up of the camera of this, how easy these are to get on and off, yeah? So now when it comes to getting these little drop lines off, it's really elementary. On the back of the prusik loop here, there's a line that goes across. You can simply just grab this line and start to pull it. And as you pull, it just kind of frees up and boom, you're off. So it's just that easy. And putting it back on, like I showed earlier in the video, you can turn around and wrap this 3 times and then set it back on. Just apply tension as you go, kind of dress the knot up, and I'm back on. So it's just that simple. Like I say, you simply just grab here and pull and it comes off. So we'll stop now and show using just one of these so you can minimize your cordage use when it comes to the larger modular components and try to save on your cordage if you're wanting to set up a lot of different things in camp, yeah? So one way or the other, I'll shift camera angles and adjust that tent peg so it's more appropriate for these sizings, and we'll take it from there. So now, like I say, I'm just going to take this tent tie-off, or tarp tie-off point, sorry. I'm going to feed my loop through that and just hook that on here as such, and then it's on, yeah? And I've got my tent peg I've adjusted now. I'm just simply going to bring this around. I'm going to take that knot and I'm going to feed it right through the locked brummel that's here, and then it's on and it's quick release. So I'm on. It's just that simple. I can use one of these little drop lines to do guy out points, if you will, with ease if I'm really trying to conserve on using my modular components as much as possible. If I've got some larger elaborate camp that has a lot of stuff set up and I don't want to be too rope heavy, but it's just that simple. Pop that off and I'm done. I want to remove that from here. It's easy enough to just pop that, slide it through, and this component's free again. And I can just put that right back onto my other line, yeah? So hopefully that gives you a couple examples. I'll stop and wrap the video up at this point in time because, like I say, I know this is getting to be a long video. So start to tear this setup down now, yeah? As you can see, the tarp is already off on that side. So the whole ground pegging thing has been dealt with already. When it comes to where I connected up to the ridgeline itself, those are all quick release. So just pop those off. One side's free. Pop off the other. It's free. So hopefully that gives you an idea how quick things can be. Like, I know in this video, kind of walking through the examples always takes a bit of time to go through. But you know, we set up a way to hang the bag. We set up the tripod, put up a rope that we could, you know, use as a clothesline or a gear hang, that kind of thing. Sorry, breeze is getting in the way of the video. But needless to say, all of this stuff, I know I stop and walk through things in detail, so this video ends up being longer than it is in real time to set up. When you're doing these things and you're out in the field with this kind of setup, I could end up having the tripod together, the bag hung, the ridge line up, and that line up in less than 10 minutes. To give you an idea how fast this stuff can happen. You know, normally when you're out doing bushcraft stuff, I know there's a joy to be had in doing all sorts of different knots and building stuff when you're out in the woods and that kind of stuff. I get all that. I, of all people, can appreciate that. But if you're not wanting to spend an hour setting up your camp every time, because it's calories out and calories in, right? When you're in any type of survival or self-reliance situation, if you're wanting to set up a camp, you don't necessarily want to have to turn around and spend an hour, especially if you're traveling and you're being mobile. You don't want to have to spend an hour every single day setting up camps in new locations and stuff all the time. That can become really just exhausting as you go. And the amount of energy it takes to do can become quite grueling, really. It all seems like minor stuff and you're just out here working with some ropes. But it can become a lot of work day after day if you're moving through, say, like a 10-day solo or something, and you're just being mobile across territory. Any way that you can save energy and save your resources, as you can see, all this stuff I tear down and reclaim and use it next time. I don't leave anything behind, especially when it comes to cordage and stuff. I don't leave any of this, you know, sitting behind in the field. It's all expensive. It all takes time to make. You saw in this video to give you an idea, to build out this entire system with all 8 of those modular components and their drop lines and everything. It was probably, realistically, I'm going to say all in about 12, maybe 15 hours. So it's not something you're just going to whip together in a couple hours to do. It's a larger, more extensive, you know, process that you go through to even acquire this level of technology. But if you ask me, it's worth it. When I can set up an entire camp and have everything raised up and have creature comforts in a matter of 10, maybe 15 minutes tops, that's unmatched. I don't know of any other bushcraft system or setup that you can do those types of things. You know, it's just as simple as that. And like I say, it's all back into a modular kit. You can throw it all back into my backpack and off I go. So I'll switch camera angles though, and I'll wrap this up with an extra, I guess it's called. And hopefully we'll catch you in the next video. So right there, fellow YouTubers, thanks for joining me in another one of my videos. If you made it this far, congratulations, you're one of the 2% that do. I know my videos get long, but I try to go through a lot of stuff in them, and I'm really making it an active effort to try to cut things down as much as possible, but I do want to show as robust an example as possible. But if you enjoy this type of content, please like, share, and subscribe. And thanks for watching, yeah? Cheers.